I'm a leaner, 34 female. I live a quiet life, one that I've meticulously curated to be a sanctuary of order and calm. My small apartment is filled with books, each one spine out in its designated place, organized not by the Dewey Decimal System I use at work, but by the emotional imprint it left on me. As a librarian in a moderately sized city, my days are governed by logic, by the comforting rustle of turning pages, and by the quiet satisfaction of connecting someone with the exact piece of information or the perfect story they were searching for. My world is one of facts, of documented history, of narratives that have a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's a world that makes sense, or at least it used to. For most of my life, I believed that if I was logical, responsible, and kind, my own story would unfold with a similar, gentle sense of order. I was wrong. My story did have a clear beginning and middle, but the end of that chapter wasn't gentle at all. It was a demolition. It began with a lie, was executed with a screaming phone call, and was designed to shatter the very foundation of my identity. My family was the one part of my life that defied categorization. On the surface, we were a picture of suburban success. My father, Richard, a retired sales manager, carried himself with an air of unshakable confidence. My mother, Susan, a former teacher, was the heart of the family, warm and nurturing, at least in theory. And then there was my sister, Chloe. 3 years younger than me, Chloe was the sun around which our family planet orbited. She was vibrant, charming, and ambitious, a lifestyle influencer whose life played out in a series of perfectly filtered, envy-inducing squares on social media. I was the moon, a quieter, more steadfast presence, reflecting her light and, as I would later learn, providing a convenient shadow in which to hide her secrets. They told me I was a thief, that I had betrayed their trust by stealing the money they worked their whole lives for. They disowned me over the phone, their voices dripping with a righteous fury that left no room for my defense. For weeks, I was adrift in a sea of confusion and grief, unable to comprehend how the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally could believe such a monstrous lie. But the truth, as it so often does, found a way to surface. It wasn't in a dramatic confession or a tearful apology. It was in the cold, blue and gray glow of a forgotten iPad, in a series of text messages that laid their conspiracy bare. They hadn't just believed a lie, they had crafted one to facilitate the theft of my future, all to bankroll the golden child's perfect life. My world of quiet order was gone, replaced by the chaotic, jagged reality of their betrayal. But as a librarian, I knew what to do with facts. I knew how to research, how to gather evidence, and how to build a case. And I decided then that the next chapter of my story would not be one of grief, it would be one of justice. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The dynamic of the golden child and the scapegoat is rarely established overnight. It's a slow build, a foundation laid brick by brick with small acts of favoritism and subtle dismissals, until an unshakable structure of dysfunction stands where a healthy family should be. In my family, Chloe was destined for the pedestal from the moment she learned to flash a dimpled smile. I was the firstborn, the trial run. I was quiet, serious, and a bit of an old soul even as a child. I was reliable, the one who remembered birthdays, who helped with chores without being asked, who got straight A's that were met with a pleased but unsurprised. "That's nice, honey." My accomplishments were expected, a baseline standard. Chloe S., on the other hand, were events. I remember my high school graduation clearly. I was the valedictorian. I had worked tirelessly for 4 years, sacrificing social events for study sessions. My speech was about the power of quiet consistency, a theme that felt deeply personal. After the ceremony, my parents gave me a firm hug. "We're proud of you, Alina," my father said, his eyes already scanning the crowd. My mother added, "A wonderful speech, dear." They bought me a sensible watch as a gift, a practical tool for a practical daughter. 2 years later, Chloe won a regional dance competition. It wasn't a state championship or anything that came with a scholarship, but to hear my parents tell it, she was the next prima ballerina. They threw a surprise party for her, inviting dozens of friends and family. The house was filled with balloons and banners. My father gave a booming speech about her passion and star power, his voice thick with emotion. My mother wept with pride. Chloe's gift was a trip to New York City to see a Broadway show. The contrast wasn't malicious. It was just the air we breathed. I was the sturdy, reliable oak tree in the background. Chloe was the dazzling, unpredictable firework that demanded everyone's attention. As we grew into adults, this dynamic only intensified. I pursued a master's degree in library science, a choice my father openly called a bit dusty but safe. I built a career, managed my finances meticulously, and lived within my means. Chloe, meanwhile, declared herself a brand consultant and lifestyle influencer. Her life, at least on Instagram, was a whirlwind of sponsored brunches, boutique hotel stays, and artfully arranged consumer goods. She was a master of aesthetics, of creating the illusion of effortless success. My parents were her biggest fans. They would call me to breathlessly recount her latest post. "Did you see Chloe in that dress from that French designer? She has over 10,000 likes." My mother would exclaim. I would murmur my congratulations while privately wondering how a person who seemed to perpetually be on vacation could afford such a lifestyle. Whenever I'd gently probe, asking if Chloe had a steady income, my parents would get defensive. "You just don't understand the new economy, Alina," my father would say dismissively. "Chloe is building a brand. It takes investment." The word investment came up a lot. It was their preferred term for the money they regularly funneled to her. It was never a handout. It was an investment in her brand, a loan for a business expense, or a gift to help her maintain the image her career apparently required. I, on the other hand, had never asked them for a penny since I graduated from college. In fact, the financial relationship was reversed. I was the one who came over to set up their new router, to troubleshoot their printer problems, and to sit with them for hours, patiently walking them through the process of setting up online banking and password managers. I was their unpaid IT support, their de facto financial administrator. I organized their digital files, scanned old documents for safekeeping, and made sure their bills were paid on time. I did it because I loved them, and because I knew they struggled with technology. It never occurred to me that this access, this trust I was so carefully tending, would one day be twisted into a weapon against me. The foundation of their financial future was a family trust, established by my grandparents. It was a considerable sum, intended to provide a comfortable retirement for my parents and then be split equally between Chloe and me upon their passing. My parents spoke of this trust often, always with an emphasis on fairness. "Everything will be split 50-50, right down the middle," my father would declare at family gatherings. "We don't play favorites with money." This statement always felt a little hollow, a little too loud, as if they were trying to convince themselves as much as anyone else. I knew Chloe received financial help that I didn't, but I compartmentalized it. I told myself it was their money to spend as they wished while they were alive. I focused on my own life, my own stability, and trusted that in the long run, their promises of equality would hold true. That trust was my greatest miscalculation. I saw myself as the responsible daughter, the anchor. But in their eyes, my stability didn't make me respectable, it made me a resource. And my access to their finances didn't make me a trusted helper, it made me the perfect scapegoat. The day my world fell apart began with the gentle hum of a library. It was a Tuesday in October, crisp and clear. The scent of old paper and bookbinding glue filled the air, a perfume I found more comforting than any designer fragrance. I spent the morning helping a college student find primary sources for a history paper and the afternoon leading a story time session for a group of wide-eyed toddlers. It was a good day, a normal day, defined by quiet purpose and the satisfaction of a job well done. I left work feeling content, planning to stop at the grocery store and then spend the evening curled up with a new novel. I had no idea that a storm was gathering, about to unleash a torrent of rage and accusation that would sweep away everything I thought was real. My phone rang as I was walking to my car. It was my father. I smiled, assuming he was calling for a casual chat or, more likely, because his email wasn't syncing again. "Hi, Dad," I answered cheerfully. Silence, then a voice I barely recognized, a voice stripped of all warmth and coated in ice. "Eleanor, we need to talk." The tone sent a shiver down my spine. "Is everything okay? Is Mom all right?" "Your mother is devastated," he bit out, "because of what you've done." My mind raced. What had I done? Had I forgotten an anniversary? Had I said something wrong the last time we spoke? "Dad, I have no idea what you're talking about." "Don't you dare play dumb with me," he snarled. The venom in his voice was shocking. "The money, Eleanor, the money you've been stealing from us." The accusation was so outlandish, so completely disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. It felt like a line from a bad movie. "Stealing? What are you talking about? That's insane." "Is it?" he shot back. "We've been noticing small amounts missing from our checking account for months. Little transactions here and there. We didn't want to believe it, but it adds up, Eleanor. It adds up to thousands of dollars." "That's impossible," I said, my voice trembling. I was standing in the middle of the parking lot, my grocery bags hanging forgotten from my hand. "I help you with your banking. I would have seen something. We should call the bank. Your account must have been compromised." "Our account was compromised," he interrupted, his voice rising to a shout. "By our own daughter. Chloe is the one who noticed. She was looking over our statements, trying to help us build a budget, and she saw the pattern. She didn't want to tell us. It broke her heart to even consider it, but she showed us. Transfers to untraceable accounts. Online purchases we never made. All originating from IP addresses linked to your devices whenever you were helping us." "Chloe, of course." A cold dread began to seep into my bones, chilling me more than the autumn air. It was a lie, a sophisticated and cruel lie, but the pieces were clicking into place. Chloe, the tech-savvy influencer. Chloe, who knew I was the only other person with access. Chloe, who could easily fabricate evidence that our non-technical parents would never know how to question. "Dad, that's not true," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "You have to listen to me. Chloe is lying. Why would I do that? I have my own money, I have a good job. Please, just let me come over, we can look at the bank records together." "No," he roared. "You are not to come here, you are not welcome in this house. How could you? After everything we've done for you. We gave you life, we gave you an education, and you repay us by robbing us blind." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and shameful. I didn't do it. Suddenly, the phone was passed, and my mother's voice, choked with sobs, came on the line. "Eleanor, I just have one question. Why, weren't we good to you? Didn't we give you everything?" "Mom, please," I begged. "It wasn't me. It's a mistake or it's a lie. Please just believe me." Her voice hardened, her grief curdling into the same righteous anger as my father's. "Believe you? How can we believe you? We saw the proof, Eleanor. Chloe showed us. My own daughter, a thief. I feel sick. I can't even look at you." The injustice of it was a physical blow, knocking the air from my lungs. My entire life, I had been the responsible one, the trustworthy one. And in the space of a single phone call, my character had been assassinated by a phantom crime, with my own sister holding the smoking gun and my parents acting as willing executioners. "We've already been to the bank," my father's voice boomed as he took the phone back. "We've changed every password. We've spoken to our lawyer. You are being written out of our will. You are no longer our daughter. Do not contact us again." And then the click, the line went dead. I stood there in the fading light of the parking lot, the silence on the other end of the phone screaming in my ears. The world around me kept moving, cars pulling out, people walking by, but my life had just come to a complete, catastrophic halt. I had been tried, convicted, and sentenced without a trial, without a chance to defend myself. The people I loved most in the world hated me. My family was gone. And in that moment of shattering despair, I had no idea that the lie was so much deeper and darker than I could have ever imagined. The phone call wasn't just about cutting me off. It was the final, brutal step in a plan to steal my entire future. The weeks that followed the phone call were a blur of muted gray. I moved through my life like a ghost, haunting the quiet aisles of the library and the silent rooms of my apartment. I performed my duties at work with robotic efficiency, my mind a million miles away. At home, I'd sit for hours, staring at the wall, replaying the conversation in my head, the vicious words of my father and the heartbroken sobs of my mother echoing in the silence. I was trapped in a state of suspended animation, caught between disbelief and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I sent a few desperate texts and emails in the first few days, pleading my innocence, begging them to talk to me. They all went unanswered. A registered letter I sent was returned, unopened. I was in exile. My friend, Ben, was my only lifeline. When I finally found the strength to call him and choke out the story, he was at my apartment within 20 minutes, a bag of takeout in one hand and a look of fierce loyalty in his eyes. He listened to the whole sordid tale without interruption, his expression growing darker with every word. "This stinks, Elle," he said, shaking his head after I'd finished. Ben was a financial advisor, a man whose entire world revolved around numbers, logic, and spotting irregularities. "This stinks to high heaven. Chloe's behind this 100%. The IP addresses linked to your devices, that's amateur hour fabrication. It's trivially easy to fake, or more likely, she just told them that and they believed it because they don't know any better. And the timing is too convenient." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. "Your parents are comfortable, but they're not endlessly wealthy," he explained, his mind already working the angles. "Chloe's influencer lifestyle costs a fortune to maintain. The travel, the clothes, the events, it's a constant cash burn. I'll bet my license she was in a financial hole, went to them for a massive bailout, and they balked. This whole Eleanor is a thief narrative, it's a smokescreen. It's a way to justify something else." His logic was a small, steady light in my fog of emotional pain. It didn't heal the wound, but it gave my analytical brain something to cling to. Still, without any contact or any proof, his theories were just that, theories. I was locked out, and the truth was locked in with them. About a month after the call, I forced myself into a frenzy of cleaning. It was a desperate attempt to impose some kind of order on my chaotic inner world. If I could control the dust and clutter in my apartment, maybe I could get a handle on the suffocating mess in my head. I was clearing out a storage closet, sorting through old electronics destined for recycling, when I found it, a third-generation iPad, tucked away in its original box. My parents had given it to me 4 or 5 years ago when they'd upgraded. I remembered setting it up for them, linking it to their Wi-Fi, and creating their Apple IDs. And, for convenience, I had linked our accounts through family sharing so we could easily share photos and app purchases. They had barely used the thing before deciding it was too complicated, and it had ended up in my closet, forgotten by everyone. On a whim born of nostalgia and a fresh pang of grief, I plugged it in. The screen flickered to life, displaying a familiar star-filled cosmos. It automatically connected to my Wi-Fi network, and then it began to sync. Notifications pinged one after another as years of forgotten software updates and data began to pour in. I was about to wipe it and put it back in the box when the Messages app icon caught my eye. A small red circle with a number in it. Curious, I tapped it. My heart stopped. The app opened to a list of recent conversations, all from the last few months. Their iMessage account was still active and linked. My finger trembled as I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the names. And there it was, a long, ongoing thread between my mother, my father, and Chloe. I hesitated for a second, feeling like an intruder, but I wasn't an intruder. I was the accused, and this was the crime scene. I tapped on the conversation. I scrolled back to the week of the phone call. The messages painted a picture so vile, so much worse than I had imagined, that I felt the air leave my lungs. "Chloe, I really need the help. This brand collaboration is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but I need to show them I have the capital to scale up. It's a $50,000 investment. Dad, Chloe, that's a huge amount of money. We're on a fixed income. I'm not sure we can just pull that from our savings. Chloe, it's not a handout, it's an investment in my future. You always said you'd support me. Besides, it's our money, isn't it? the trust is for us." "Mom, the trust is for both of you, sweetie. It wouldn't be fair to a leaner to give you such a large amount from it." There was a long pause in the conversation, and then Chloe's next message appeared, a masterclass in manipulation. "Chloe, I understand. It's just, I was looking at your bank statements to see if I could help you budget, and I've been noticing some weird things. Small amounts, but they add up. Has a leaner been helping you with your online banking lately?" The poison was planted. She then sent a series of screenshots, doctored, I was sure of it, supposedly showing suspicious transactions. My parents' replies were frantic and confused, and Chloe played the part of the reluctant, heartbroken detective perfectly. "Chloe, I don't want to believe it. Maybe I'm wrong, but it just seems so odd. Please don't be mad at her. I'm sure she's just struggling financially." And then, the final, damning exchange that laid the whole conspiracy bare. It was from the day before they called me. "Dad, okay, we've talked it over. This is a mess. We can't prove she took it without a big legal fight, and we don't want to send our daughter to jail." "Mom, my poor leaner, I can't believe it." "Chloe, so Hat do we do about my investment?" "Dad, here's the plan. We will treat the $50,000 you need as an advance on a leaner's portion of the inheritance. We'll consider it recovering the money she stole. That way, it's fair. We'll take it from her share of the trust. We'll have to cut her off, of course, for her own good, to teach her a lesson." I stared at the screen, my vision blurring with tears. But these weren't tears of grief. They were tears of pure, incandescent rage. They knew I hadn't stolen a dime. The entire story, the missing money, the investigation, the heartbreak, was a lie. A disgusting, elaborate piece of theater they had all performed to justify giving my sister my inheritance while painting themselves as the victims. They hadn't just disowned me, they had robbed me, using my own good name as collateral. The weight of grief on my chest evaporated, replaced by something cold, hard, and sharp. It was the feeling of a librarian who had just found the primary source document she needed. It was the feeling of a woman who now had a reason to fight back. The fury that coursed through me was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was a clean, purifying fire, burning away the last vestiges of sorrow and helplessness. My hands were steady as I meticulously took photos of the iPad screen with my phone, capturing every single incriminating text message, every timestamp, every word of their deceit. I documented the entire conversation, from Chloe's initial request for money to my father's sickeningly pragmatic plan. Each snapshot was a piece of ammunition, a fragment of truth in a war they had started. When I was done, I powered down the iPad and placed it carefully back in its box, sealing it like a piece of evidence. It was my smoking gun. The first and only call I made was to Ben. "I have it," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I have proof, all of it." He was at my door again within the hour. I had the photos I'd taken up on my laptop screen, arranged in chronological order. Ben sat beside me on the sofa, and we read through them together in silence. I watched his face shift from concern to disbelief, and finally to a look of utter disgust. When he finished the last message, he leaned back, letting out a long, slow whistle. "Wow," he said, shaking his head. "I knew it was bad, Elle. I never imagined it was this premeditated. This is a conspiracy to commit fraud." "What they're describing," I said, pointing to the screen, "taking money from my share of the trust. Is that even legal?" "Not a chance," Ben said, his professional indignation kicking in. "A trust is a legal entity with strict rules. Your parents are the trustees, which means they have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of all beneficiaries. That means you and Chloe. They can't just reallocate your share to her on a whim, especially not based on a lie they cooked up themselves. This is a massive breach of that duty. This is the kind of thing that gets trustees sued into oblivion." His words were validating, empowering. For the first time in over a month, I felt like I was on solid ground. "So what do we do?" "We dig," he said, his eyes gleaming with a strategic light. "We have the why. Now we need to find the what. We need to follow the money. That $50,000. Chloe didn't use it for a business investment. People who need capital for a legitimate business opportunity don't orchestrate a conspiracy to steal from their sister, they write a business plan. Ben was right. The texts gave me the motive, but I needed to build a complete picture of their financial deception. My methodical librarian brain kicked into high gear. The first step was to see if Chloe's story had any truth to it. I spent the next several hours online, not in the library's databases, but in the curated world of Chloe's social media. I scrolled back through her Instagram feed for the past 2 months. There was no mention of a new business venture, no hint of a major brand collaboration. What I did find, posted just 1 week after the devastating phone call, was a series of glossy, sun-drenched photos from Dubai. Her posing on a yacht. Her dining at a restaurant atop the Burj Khalifa. Her shopping in malls filled with luxury brands, bags from Chanel and Gucci dangling from her arms. The captions were filled with hashtags like brand trip and work hard, play hard, painting it as a business expense. It was sickening. She was funding this lavish vacation with my future, celebrating her victory while I was at home, shattered. The next piece of the puzzle was harder to get. I needed to see the actual financial transactions. I remembered the boxes of old family documents I had stored in my attic, files I had helped my parents organize years ago. They had asked me to scan and digitize their records, and being me, I had kept both the digital copies on an encrypted hard drive and the original paper files, neatly labeled. It was a long shot, but I hoped something in there could help. After hours of sifting through old tax returns and insurance policies, I found it, a folder labeled Bank Statements 2015-2020. It contained statements from the very account my parents had accused me of stealing from. While it didn't have the recent transactions, it gave me something crucial: the account numbers and the bank's contact information. It also contained something else. Tucked into a folder of miscellaneous documents were several old statements for Chloe's credit cards, statements my mother had presumably kept after helping her pay a bill years ago. Even then, the pattern was clear. Maxed out cards, late fees, cash advances. Chloe was a financial wrecking ball, and my parents were her long-suffering cleanup crew. Ben used this information to form a plan. "We can't get their recent bank records directly," he explained. "But we can get Chloe's. If she paid off her credit cards with that 50 grand, the payments will show up on her statements. And people with her spending habits are usually drowning in debt." He pointed to the old statements I'd found. "She probably has cards with these same companies. If we can prove a sudden, massive payment to a credit card company right after she received the money from your parents, we can show that the business investment was a lie." The problem was getting her recent credit card statements, but then I remembered another piece of my role as the family tech support. Years ago, I had set Chloe up with a credit monitoring service to help her manage her finances. I was almost certain I still had the login information saved in my password manager. My hands shook as I typed in her email address and the password. It worked. I was in. And there it was, laid out in stark black and white. Her credit report was a disaster, a mountain of debt spread across 4 different high-interest credit cards, totaling just over $48,000. And then I saw the recent activity. 6 weeks ago, on the same day she would have received the wire transfer from my parents, there were 4 huge payments, one to each credit card, wiping out the balances completely. The total came to $48,327. The remaining money, I had no doubt, went to booking the flights to Dubai. The web of lies was completely unraveled. There was no stolen money. There was no business investment. There was only Chloe, drowning in debt from living a life she couldn't afford, and my parents, who were so desperate to maintain the illusion of their perfect golden child that they were willing to sacrifice their other daughter to bail her out. They didn't just lie, they constructed an entire alternate reality. And now, I had the map. With the full, ugly picture of Chloe's financial desperation and our parents' complicity laid bare, Ben and I moved on to the final and most critical phase of our investigation: the family trust itself. The text messages were the confession, and the financial records were the corroborating evidence, but the trust document was the rule book they had broken. To win this fight, I needed to know that book better than they did. "Your first call tomorrow morning is to John Alastair," Ben said, scribbling a name and number on a notepad. "He's the estate lawyer who drafted the trust for your grandparents. His firm is old school, reputable. He's legally obligated to provide a beneficiary with a copy of the trust document upon request. Don't tell him anything about the situation. Just state your name, confirm you're a beneficiary, and request a full copy." The next morning, I made the call. The paralegal who answered was polite and efficient. She confirmed my identity with a few security questions and promised to have a secure digital copy of the trust agreement sent to my email by the end of the day. Waiting for that email was agonizing. It felt like I was waiting for a verdict. When it finally arrived, a PDF file locked with a password they'd given me over the phone, my hands trembled as I opened it. It was a dense, 40-page document filled with impenetrable legal jargon. For a moment, I was overwhelmed. But then my librarian training took over. This was just another form of research. It was about finding specific information within a complex text, about understanding syntax and definitions. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, sat down at my dining table, and began to read, a highlighter and notepad by my side. Ben came over that evening, and we spread the printed pages across my table. He, with his financial background, and I, with my knack for dissecting text, made a surprisingly effective team. We went through it section by section, article by article. Much of it was standard boilerplate language about asset management and tax liabilities. But then, deep in Article IV, titled Distributions During Grantor's Lifetime, we found it. Section 4.2, Discretionary Distributions of Principal. It stated that the trustees, my parents, had the right to make distributions from the trust's principal for the health, education, maintenance, and support of the beneficiaries. This was the clause they had likely used to justify previous gifts to Chloe, but it was the next section that made my heart leap. Section 4.3, Notice of Major Distributions. In the event the trustees intend to make a single distribution of principal to any one beneficiary exceeding $25,000, $25,000 in any calendar year, I read aloud, my voice clear and steady. The trustees must provide written notification to all other current beneficiaries no less than 30 days prior to the distribution. Said notification must include the amount and purpose of the distribution. The distribution may only proceed upon receipt of a signed acknowledgement from all other beneficiaries, or in the absence of such acknowledgement, a court order. Ben slammed his hand on the table, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. "That's it, Aliner. That's the kill shot. They needed your signature. A $50,000 distribution required your written, signed consent. They didn't get it, which means the entire transfer was an illegal distribution under the terms of their own trust. They had either not known this clause existed or, more likely, had banked on the fact that I, the non-financial daughter, would never think to look for it. They assumed their scheme of cutting me off would prevent me from ever discovering the transaction in the first place. Their arrogance was their undoing. But there was more. We kept reading, our focus now razor-sharp. We found another critical section under Article VII, Trustee Removal and Replacement. It outlined the conditions under which a trustee could be removed. The list included incapacity, resignation, and, most importantly, gross negligence or willful misconduct in the administration of the trust, resulting in material harm to a beneficiary. "This is it," I whispered, feeling the full weight of my power coalesce. Their conspiracy, the fraudulent transfer, the lies they used to justify it, it's a textbook case of willful misconduct. And the harm is material, it's $50,000 of my inheritance. The plan began to form in my mind, not as a vague desire for revenge, but as a clear, logical sequence of actions. This wouldn't be a screaming match. It wouldn't be an emotional appeal for justice. It would be a quiet, methodical dismantling of their authority. It would be a business transaction where I held all the leverage. That weekend, Ben put me in touch with a lawyer he knew, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Ms. Davies who specialized in trust and estate litigation. I laid out the whole story for her, presenting my evidence in a neatly organized folder. The printed text messages, Chloe's credit card statements, the Dubai vacation photos, and finally, the trust document with the relevant clauses highlighted. Ms. Davies listened patiently, her expression unreadable. When I finished, she looked at the highlighted copy of Section 4.3. A slow, thin smile touched her lips. "Well, Ms. Vance," she said, "they've made this rather easy for us. You have them dead to rights. We can file a petition with the court immediately to freeze the trust's assets and begin proceedings to have your parents removed as trustees. It will be public, it will be messy, and given this evidence, you will win." She paused, then tilted her head. "Or, you could offer them an alternative, a private settlement, one that gives you everything you want without dragging the family name through the mud." And that's when I knew exactly what I was going to do. I didn't want a messy public battle. I just wanted what was mine, and I wanted to be free. The best revenge wasn't destroying them in a courtroom. It was using their own deceit to surgically remove myself from their toxic orbit, taking my entire future with me. The plan was no longer just about getting my money back. It was about taking back control. I would give them one chance to avoid total humiliation. I would invite them to dinner. Making the call was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. I practiced in front of the mirror, modulating my voice to sound wounded and fragile, not cold and calculating. I had to swallow every ounce of my rage and channel the broken version of Alina they expected me to be. When I finally dialed my mother's number, my heart was hammering against my ribs. She answered on the second ring, her voice wary. "Hello." "Mom, it's Alina," I said, pitching my voice to sound like I was on the verge of tears. There was a long, heavy silence. "Your father and I told you not to call." "I know," I whispered, letting my voice crack. "I'm sorry to bother you. I just can't go on like this. I've been a mess. I know you're angry and you have every right to be. I need to understand. I need to talk to you, to Dad, to Chloe, in person. I'll do whatever it takes. I'll apologize. I just want my family back." It was a gamble, an appeal to the last shred of maternal guilt I hoped she possessed. I could hear her talking to my father in the background, her hand muffled over the receiver. After a moment, she came back on the line, her tone softened slightly. "Your father doesn't think it's a good idea." "Please, Mom," I pleaded. "Just one dinner. Here at my apartment, it's neutral ground. Let me cook for you. If, after we talk, you still want me out of your lives, I'll accept it and never bother you again. Please." Another pause. "All right, Alina," she said with a sigh. "One dinner. We'll be there on Saturday at 7. And Chloe is coming too. We're a family and we'll face this as a family." The irony of that statement was so thick I could have choked on it. The next few days were spent in preparation, not for a dinner party, but for a corporate takeover. Ms. Davies drafted the settlement agreement. It was a masterpiece of legal precision. It stipulated the immediate dissolution of the existing family trust. The total assets were to be appraised and then split exactly in half. Two new, entirely separate trusts would be created, the Alina Vance Trust and the Chloe Vance Trust. My trust would be managed by an independent corporate trustee of my choosing. I would have sole control, with no ability for my parents or sister to access or influence it. Their half they could do with as they pleased. The agreement also specified that the initial $50,000, plus my legal fees and a further sum for emotional distress, would be deducted from Chloe's half before the split was made. It was non-negotiable. Ben helped me prepare a folder containing all the evidence, printed and neatly organized with tabs: text messages, financials, trust violations. On Saturday evening, I was a bundle of calm, controlled energy. I cooked a simple roast chicken, a meal my mother loved. I set the table with my best dinnerware. When the doorbell rang at precisely 7, I took one last deep breath and opened the door. They stood there on my doorstep looking like a united, judgmental front. My father's expression was stern, my mother's was sorrowful, and Chloe, S was a mask of smug pity. They walked in, their movements stiff and awkward in my small apartment. "This is a lovely place, Eleanor," my mother said, her voice strained. "Very neat." "It suits me," I replied calmly. Dinner was excruciating. They made stilted small talk while I served the food. Chloe dominated the conversation, talking about a new wellness brand she was collaborating with, dropping names and talking about metrics my parents clearly didn't understand, but nodded along to with beaming pride. I stayed mostly silent, eating slowly, letting her dig her own grave. She was playing the part of the successful, forgiving daughter, magnanimously allowing her disgraced sister one last audience. It was almost poetic. Finally, when the dinner plates were cleared, I folded my hands on the table. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice even. "I know this is difficult." My father cleared his throat, ready to launch into what I was sure was a prepared lecture. "Eleanor, your mother and I have talked, and we—" "Before you say anything," I interrupted, holding up a hand, "I have something I need to share with you. I told you I wanted to understand, and for the past 2 months, I've been doing my research. I've finally found some clarity." I reached beside my chair and placed the evidence folder in the center of the table. I slid it towards my father. "Why don't you start with the first tab?" He opened it warily. His eyes scanned the first page of printed text messages. I watched the confident, righteous anger in his face slowly curdle into confusion, then dawning horror. My mother leaned over to look, her hand flying to her mouth. Chloe froze, her fork halfway to her lips, her face paling. I didn't need to say a word. I just sat there in silence as they turned the pages. I watched their eyes move from the texts detailing their conspiracy to the bank records showing the $50,000 transfer, to Chloe's credit card statements showing the debt payoffs, to the Instagram photos of her lavish Dubai trip. It was a silent, systematic execution of their narrative. Finally, my father reached the last tab, the one labeled Trust Violations. He read the highlighted copy of Section 4.3, the clause requiring my written consent. He read it once, then twice. He looked up at me, his face ashen. For the first time in my life, I saw him completely stripped of his bluster. He looked old and defeated. Chloe finally broke the silence. "This is insane. You spied on me, you hacked my accounts." I turned my calm, unwavering gaze to her. "You mean the accounts I set up for you because you were too irresponsible to manage your own finances?" "No, I just looked at the evidence you all left behind. It turns out, when you conspire to commit fraud a text message, it leaves a record." I then slid a second folder onto the table. It contained 4 copies of the settlement agreement drafted by Ms. Davies, with a pen placed neatly beside each one. "Here is the solution," I said, my voice as crisp and cool as an autumn night. "This is not a negotiation. This is the only alternative to a very public, very embarrassing lawsuit that I will file on Monday morning. You will dissolve the family trust. My half of the assets, including the $50,000 you stole from me, plus my legal fees, will be placed in a new trust that I control completely. You will sign these documents tonight. And then you will leave, and we will be finished." My father stared at the agreement, then at me. My mother was openly weeping. Chloe was sputtering, a mixture of rage and panic in her eyes, but I didn't look at them anymore. I looked at the pen on the table. My quiet life had been shattered, but in its place, I had forged a will of iron. The screaming phone call was a distant echo. This quiet, deafening silence was the new sound of my victory. The silence in the room stretched for what felt like an eternity, thick with the weight of shattered illusions and unspoken accusations. It was broken only by my mother's ragged sobs. Chloe was the first to find her voice, and it was laced with a venom born of pure desperation. "You can't do this," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "This is blackmail. Dad, don't let her do this." My father, however, wasn't looking at Chloe. He was looking at the settlement agreement, his years as a sales manager allowing him to recognize a situation where he had absolutely no leverage. He understood contracts, he understood consequences, and he understood that I had him trapped. He slowly picked up the pen, his hand shaking slightly, and looked at me. His eyes weren't filled with anger anymore, but with a strange, hollowed-out expression of defeat. "She's right, Chloe," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper. "She has us, we sign." He signed his name on the signature line, his usually bold script reduced to a shaky scrawl. My mother, her face streaked with tears, followed suit without even reading the document. Chloe stared at them aghast, her sense of entitlement warring with the dawning reality of her situation. "You're just going to give in? You're going to let her ruin everything?" "You ruined everything, Chloe," my father said, the words heavy with a finality that seemed to surprise even him. It was perhaps the first time in her life he had ever held her accountable for anything. With a choked sob of fury, Chloe snatched the pen and angrily signed her name, her signature a jagged slash across the page. I signed last, my hand perfectly steady. I collected the signed documents. "Ms. Davies, my lawyer, will be in touch with yours on Monday to begin the process," I said, my tone as neutral as if I were discussing library hours. "I believe this dinner is over." They left without another word. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My mother looked at me with a pleading, desperate expression that I refused to acknowledge. Chloe shot me a look of pure hatred. I closed the door behind them, and as the lock clicked into place, the strength that had carried me through the evening finally buckled. I leaned against the door and slid to the floor, the profound sadness of it all washing over me. I had won. I had secured my future and served justice. But in the process, I had officially lost my family. The victory tasted of ash. The following months were a period of quiet, deliberate reconstruction. The legal process was swift and impersonal. True to my father's assessment, their lawyer advised them not to fight. The evidence was too damning. The assets of the Vance family trust were liquidated, and the funds were split exactly as the settlement agreement dictated. A significant portion was transferred from Chloe's share to mine to cover the initial $50,000, my legal fees, and the damages. On the day the funds cleared in the account of my new, independent trust, I didn't feel a rush of excitement. I felt a quiet sense of peace. It wasn't wealth. It was security. It was freedom. It was the foundation for a life that would be entirely my own, built on my own terms, free from the toxic gravitational pull of my family's dysfunction. I never spoke to them again. I heard snippets through the grapevine of mutual acquaintances. My parents had sold the family home and downsized, their retirement not as comfortable as they had planned without the full trust to support them. Their relationship with Chloe was apparently strained to the breaking point. The curtain had been pulled back, and they could no longer unsee the selfish, manipulative person they had enabled for 3 decades. Chloe's influencer career, without the constant secret subsidies from mom and dad, began to flounder. Her curated life of effortless luxury became much harder to fake and she actually had to earn it. The brand trips dried up, and her feed became a less glamorous stream of local coffee shops and discount clothing hauls. I took no pleasure in her downfall. Her life, her choices, were no longer my concern. For my part, I used my newfound independence to build the life I had always quietly wanted. I kept my job at the library. My career was my own accomplishment, something I had earned and loved. But with the security of the trust, I had options. I bought a small house on a tree-lined street with a little garden in the back. It was my sanctuary, filled with books and light and quiet. I started traveling, not to glamorous, Instagrammable resorts, but to places I had only read about. I walked through ancient libraries in Europe, hiked through national parks, and sat in cafes for hours, just reading and watching the world go by. I spent more time with Ben, whose unwavering friendship had been my anchor through the storm. Our bond, forged in loyalty and trust, deepened into something more. He became my true family, the one you choose, not the one you are born into. One evening, about a year after that final dinner, Ben and I were sitting in my garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. I felt a profound sense of contentment. The scars of my family's betrayal were still there, a faint, silvery network over my heart, but they no longer ached. They were just a part of my story, a reminder of my own resilience. I had once been the scapegoat, the the quiet, overlooked daughter living in the shadow of a golden child. But by embracing the very traits they had dismissed, my methodical nature, my love for facts, my quiet consistency, I had rewritten my own narrative. I had not only survived their storm, I had learned to build my own shelter, and in doing so, had finally found my way home.